the people of France hold Verdun as a sacred place. It's very, very important in their statehood, in their history. That particular picture comes from 1638, but it goes way back to Roman times. The name itself, Verdun, I believe translates from the Old French as hard fort. So it was a fortress place, even when the Gauls were trying to fight off the Romans. And then various stages through history, it continues to be important. So the fellow we know as Charlemagne, that tremendous ruler of much of Europe, going back to what we call the Dark Ages. When he died, then the Treaty of Verdun in 1843 was where his empire was divided up. You see there, it's divided up into four ways. That happened at Verdun. Verdun is significant to the French because of that and other things. For some time, it was famous for, well, it was famous for a trade in eunuchs, of all things. So that picture is from Game of Thrones. That's the only eunuch I could think of who might be well known. So that was in the what we might call the early Middle Ages. And again, sugared almonds. So Verdun, other than the military side of things, was known for sugared almonds. Late in 1915, the Allies have decided that it's time for a big offensive. We want a joint offensive between the British and the French, and this will happen in the summer. And of course, we know that this offensive is the Somme. They did not realize that the Germans were going to call an offensive of their own at Verdun. The Verdun attack came as something of a surprise. The guy behind it was the then commander of the German military, Mr. Falkenhayn. And in his memoirs, he claims that the Battle of Verdun is intended to bleed France white. Now, this is what he says in his memoirs. As you may already know, or certainly you'll know by the end of this, we can't really say that the Germans won Verdun or the French won Verdun. It was pretty much a stalemate. The French recaptured a lot of what was lost, but nobody really achieved a great deal in Verdun, apart from using up a lot of ammunition, which will have pleased the arms manufacturers, and killing lots of people, which is not good for either side. If we just go back to that map there, Verdun is a bulge in the line. You'll know the word salient, I'm sure. And Falkenhayn thought to himself, well, the town of Verdun, it's sacred to the French. They will hold it to the last man. If we attack there, they will be determined to keep it. And they will just keep feeding men into Verdun, and we can use it as a killing ground. And because we're kind of, in a sense, there's like three sides of a square, isn't it? If they get up lots of artillery, they can fire into that and just murder Frenchmen. Also, to help them, they've cut the railway line into Verdun, so you can't get supplies by rail. There is one road going into Verdun. It's called the Sacred Way. We'll see that in a moment. And that was also within artillery range for the Germans, so they could even do damage to the supplies coming into Verdun. So there's Falkenhayn, whose idea it is. The French think that this is a quiet sector. They're actually pulling guns out of the forts because they're not expecting to have a big fight with the Germans in that location. And the guy that's in command is a fellow called Herr, who's quite elderly, really, so that they're not expecting much to happen. So they're a bit surprised when it does. So in February, we'll see the dates in a moment. In February, the Germans put in this massive attack that they've prepared for secretly. In many ways, it's echoed by the Battle of the Bulge in 1944, where the Germans put in a surprise attack, and the Allies aren't expecting it. So the attack goes in, massive bombardment, massive infantry advance. The Germans are taking ground, and the French quickly realise that they need their top man, they need their top commander to be available to go to Verdun to command the troops. And who will that hero be? Well, there's a highly respected gentleman called Philippe Pétain. He's going to be the man of the hour, and he is indeed the man of the hour. So the cry goes up, call for Pétain. Can't find him. They look all over Paris in headquarters, can't find him anywhere. Where could he be? We need him now to go straight away to Verdun, but he's not to be found. And his Batman, or ADC, thinks, I think I may know where my master is. And so he goes to a particular hotel. It's near the Gare du Nord. And he walks along the corridors of the hotel, and he finds what he's looking for. He finds his master's slippers. Sorry, his master's boots. He recognizes Pétain's boots sitting outside a room, alongside a lovely pair of ladies' Molière slippers. Ah, I found my master, but he has company. Oh, right, okay. France needs the man of the hour. This is the hour. So he knocks on the door, and Pétain comes to the door. He's not too pleased to be interrupted. And the Batman says, Sir, the Germans are putting in a massive attack at Verdun. We need you to come straight away. Drop whatever you're doing, and whoever you're doing it with, and come now to Verdun. And Pétain says, in his Gallic way, we will go first thing in the morning. I'm busy at the moment. We will get up early. We will have breakfast. We'll go straight to Verdun in the morning. But for now, I'm with someone. And I love the way. So I mentioned Alistair Horn and his book, The Price of Glory. I love the way he phrases this. He says, the knight has other duties. And the lady with whom he had the other duties, would you believe the name is Eugénie Hardon? I think that's just such a brilliant name for the lady. Maybe we'll see her again. I was very pleased to find that particular colorized photograph of French troops, because you'll notice there's a gentleman in the middle there who's a black guy. Now, I do like to share this idea with people about Verdun, that the French mobilized their North African soldiers. So soldiers from places like Senegal, and the Germans did not. Well, the German possessions in Africa were kind of further away. They had an interesting time in East Africa, but regret I don't have time to share about that. But the Germans weren't used to black troops fighting for the German army. And there were these horrible, frightening black African troops that the French were using. They used them as shock troops. And the Germans, well, they're unfamiliar with black troops. Maybe the idea of someone who is black is kind of a bit frightening if you're German. And they were also convinced that they were all cannibals and so on. So they weren't necessarily killers. They will take us prisoner and then eat us one of them at a time. So this, where the French used black troops, it did give them a bit of a morale advantage, and there were black troops used at Verdun. It's my view that the Germans were fairly advanced with fighting techniques, and this is clearly a stage photograph. So you've got the heavy machine gun there, the Maxim machine gun, and the stick grenade, the guy with the stick grenade there with the gas mask. So gas, first used in volume by the Germans at the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915. But then, of course, yeah, the British, we were looking into it anyway, so we used it at the Battle of Loos later in 1915. Gas is used quite a lot at Verdun, often, well, usually delivered in artillery shells. And I would suggest that the Germans have maybe got slightly better technology for the fighting at Verdun. They also start using flamethrowers as well. That slide there is the German battlefront in March 1916. I put that slide in to make the point that each German regiment was put in place and then stayed in that location. This was the way that the Germans tended to fight. Each unit goes to an allocated place in the front and then just stays there for several months. This is a different approach to the British and the French. Certainly the British way of fighting is that any unit that goes into the front line is there for maybe anywhere between 8 and 12 days and then gets rotated out. The Germans weren't rotating. So you'd have men from particular regiments. I would see Bavarian regiments there and so on. And there would be men in that regiment at the beginning of the fighting, and they would simply be reinforced. There'd be fresh soldiers put in to build up the numbers, build back the numbers back up in those regiments as men became available, and more units would be put in. But it's quite possible that a German soldier would start the Battle of Verdun in February in a particular location, and he might actually still be there, if he was lucky enough to survive, in December when the battle comes to its conclusion. So here we have one slide showing us the whole of the Battle of Verdun 1916. Now I specify 1916 because it's actually the third Battle of Verdun, and there's further fighting at Verdun after 1916. But when you say the Battle of Verdun, most people mean the fight in 1916. Now, wiggling my cursor, you can see here this backline here. 21st of February is when the Germans put in a massive bombardment, and then their infantry go over the top. On the fighting to begin with is mostly on the east bank of the Meuse, and you can see there, I'm kind of wiggling my line, 26th of February, in 5 days, the Germans make quite an advance. So looking at that scale, maybe 4 kilometers in places, maybe 2 kilometers in other places. But what is very distressing for the French is you see there that Douaumont is taken by the 26th of February. This is an absolute disaster. What is typical of Verdun is the use of artillery on both sides, massive, huge artillery pieces. Of course, the Germans planned this secretly, brought up massive artillery guns, and a lot of these are railway guns. I've probably heard of railway guns. You have to move them by rail because they're so big. And here we have the Long Max, one of the larger guns. These are the kind of guns that you'd expect to find on a big battleship. There's a gun position for a Long Max north of Verdun, which I had the good fortune to visit. It's basically a concrete platform, which in some ways replicates a gun position on a battleship. The French also have some big guns. There's a 370mm howitzer, and you can see there in the photograph the scale. You can see the men behind, and that they need to use a crane to actually lift the shells because the shells are so big. Now, another feature of the Battle of Verdun is the use of observation from the air. A key element of fighting in World War I is to be able to get whatever height is available to help your artillery observers. The higher up you get, the better they can observe. The further they can see, the better they can direct artillery fire. So you want any hill crest that's possible, and if you can't do that, well, you can put up an observation balloon. But then an observation balloon could then the countermeasure to artillery balloons is, of course, aeroplanes. Aeroplanes is still very new technology. Now the Germans have been doing pretty well. Prior to 1916, they'd had the Fokker Scourge, where they developed a single plane monoplane, the Fokker E-11, which could fire through the propeller using an interrupter gear. So there's a particular mechanism. As the propeller came in front of the machine gun would hopefully be blocked from firing, except it didn't always work. So the great ace Max Immelmann, we understand that he died when he shot through his own propeller, and it was too far to the ground. You couldn't manage to level out. However, by Verdun, the French are improving their air power, and we have aeroplanes like the Nieuport 11, and certain French pilots actually become quite skilled, and we could claim that Verdun is where pilots such as Jean Navarre and Charles Gurneymer kind of begin to get established. So the beginning of the Battle of Verdun starts on the 21st of February, and here are so this is on the northeast of the city. You can see that at the top of the picture, the northern line, there's the 21st, there's the line on the 23rd, and so on. And we get down to the 25th and the 26th. Now, the French weren't expecting an attack here, and so there'd been guns in the forts, and they'd stripped these guns out to send them elsewhere where they thought they needed them more, and they've reduced the number of men in the fort because they're not expecting an attack. And so Fort Douaumont, which is the key position, it's got maybe somewhere between 50 and 60 men inside, and they're just not expecting an attack yet. They don't realize how close the Germans have come. Now this is a picture of Douaumont early on in the fighting. So this is actually, so the pointy end is pointing towards where they're expecting the Germans to attack from, and this back end here is where the main gate is. There's more photographs to come, so you might get a better idea of the fort. But you've got a dry ditch here. You've got the fort. It's got concrete over the top and then buried, so it's kind of largely underground as a defence. That's at the beginning of the fighting, and that's towards the end of the fighting. You can just see the massive amount of artillery that's been concentrated on this fort. You see the damage there. You can also see some of the trench lines. And then those are those two pictures put side by side so you compare them directly. So Douaumont takes a huge amount of damage through the fighting, but it's actually taken on the day almost by accident, by happy coincidence for the Germans. So there's various stories, but this is the version that I believe. There's a group of about 10 men, combat engineers from the Brandenburg Regiment, led by Sergeant Kunze. And they've got ahead of their barrage, and they're a bit stuck. They're trying to send up flares to say to the artillery, stop firing, but that message isn't getting through. The firing is still going. The barrage is creeping forward, and they think, well, we've got to go forward. They go forward, they see Douaumont, they see the dry ditch, and they're astonished that there appears to be very little activity in the fort. There's the big gun on the top firing over some kilometers away, but Kunze gets into the ditch and he sees these machine gun positions which should be manned and should be firing into the dry ditch. They're empty. There's nobody there. He gets his men into the dry ditch. They form a human pyramid. It's almost a circus act. And he climbs up, gets into the fort, calls his men to follow him. They refuse because they think that it's an ambush. And he walks around the fort with his rifle, eventually finds the gun position where the big gun is firing and takes them. But there's only one man. Well, fortunately for him, there's some further men from the Brandenburg Regiment led by Lieutenant Radke. They turn up. So Radke then organizes the men that Kunze has left behind. He takes several more men into the fort, and they take control of Fort Douaumont. So it's a handful of Germans capture the fort. There's only about 50 or 60 French in there. I believe there's a hot dinner out on the table, so they're very pleased to eat the hot dinner as well as take the fort. And I was rather pleased to find this newspaper extract from, I shall translate as the Baden Citizen newspaper on February the 26th. It says the storming of Fort Douaumont was storming. Well, a handful of men took it by accident, but for a newspaper headline, storming will do nicely. And over 10,000 French take prisoner. Well, that might be elsewhere as well as Douaumont. So the Germans are thrilled to bits. The French are horrified. This is terrible. Their greatest fort has fallen to kind of like no casualties. No one was killed taking Fort Douaumont. So this helps the French resolve. Verdun must be held at all costs, and Pétain introduces the Noria system. So he says, yeah, we're not going to give any ground, and Noria is where French soldiers are rotated in and out of Verdun. Now, this is good in the sense that there's a continual stream of fresh Frenchmen going into Verdun, but Verdun is a killing ground. And I'm not sure whether every French regiment spent time at the front at Verdun, but almost every French regiment. So this meant that because the French took so many casualties, and every regiment has taken casualties at Verdun, it has a huge morale effect on the French. Every regiment, near enough, has been to Verdun and has got blasted apart, and they've lost so many men. And the following year, 1917, following further French assaults, further French offensives, the French soldiers actually mutinied in the sense of they refused to go over the top again. If the Germans attacked, they would defend, but they're not going to do another offensive. We've seen too many of our brothers murdered. This photograph is on Hill 304. This is to the west side of the town, and you see there these are hastily dug French trenches, not the well-developed trenches that we're familiar with seeing elsewhere on the Western Front. German photograph. I believe this isn't a stage photograph. I think this is a real photograph of the fighting. A very famous one. You see the French soldier being shot in the middle of the photograph. So the fighting, it begins on the east side, fighting against the fortresses. On the west side, there's two big hills, Hill 304 that we saw, and Le Morton, the dead man. And the Germans are attacking there as well. And here we see the use of flamethrowers, a very horrible weapon. And when used against a confined space, such as a fort, very dangerous and very nasty. No, I did mention this earlier. There is one road leading into Verdun. It is the sacred way, the Voie Sacrée. This is the lifeline. And there were lorries just continually going into Verdun with fresh troops and equipment and food and logistics. And then on the return leg, it's the wounded coming back out. And the French are absolutely dependent on this. They have teams of men just dedicated, a couple of kilometers per team. They're just there continually trying to keep the road in good enough condition to keep going. And the drivers are, again, heroes of Verdun, maybe driving continually for 12, 14, 16 hours with their hands ended up, the flesh gripping onto the steering wheel, and then they're losing some of the flesh on the steering wheel. It's just horrible. So here's another fort. This is the next fort along from Douaumont, Fort Vaux. It's smaller. The forts are meant to be mutually supporting. So there's artillery 75mm guns in some cases. So here you can, maybe this is kind of quite helpful to see that it was a buried fort with a dry ditch. There's the plan of the fort. You've got kind of barracks, then you've got machine gun positions and so on. And I think it's about July or so, the Germans get a bit closer. There we have a picture there showing the trench lines getting close to Fort Vaux. And they basically, they smother the fort. They do a big push. They get on top of the fort. We'll just show you that one again. And one of the ways they get in is they go up to a machine gun position. They get a big bundle of grenades on a rope, drop it over the side, pull the fuse, blow a big hole in the machine gun position, and then go crawling into the machine gun position. They're fighting through the tunnels, through the corridors inside. They're taking ground kind of a yard at a time. It's just horrible. And the French can't get any supplies in there. They think they're okay for water, but it turns out that the marker, the indicator on the cistern is broken. So they thought they had water for a few more days, but actually they're out of water because there's no water left, and they're forced to surrender. Just prior to surrender, the last living free French creature to get out is a pigeon. So Commander Raynal sends out this pigeon with a message attached to its leg, which reads, it flies back to Verdun. The message says, "We have to surrender. We cannot continue any longer. Very sorry. Vive la France. Ils ne passeront pas." All that stuff. The pigeon, of course, delivers its message and then promptly expires. So that the pigeon, of course, is a great hero at Fort Vaux. So far, the Germans have been doing pretty well. The French do have some determined commanders, which includes General Mangin, who did not worry about sending Frenchmen to their deaths. He was very determined to put in the attacks, send the men forward as needed. He wasn't particularly wasteful of life, but he was certainly very ready to send men forward into the attacks. He had the nickname Butcher Mangin, and maybe he did have a lot of Black African troops available, which he liked to use as assault troops. So, and maybe he wasn't so careful about the lives of Black African soldiers. So General Mangin is one of the key commanders in the French helping to, as it were, turn the tide and make some, recover some ground at Verdun. Now, the French eventually crack the Douaumont problem by bringing up two new super heavy guns. These are newly designed 40mm railway guns. They've called them Alsace and Lorraine. These are the two provinces that have been lost to Germany from the Franco-Prussian War. Their range is nearly 10 miles, but they're actually positioned about 8 miles away from Verdun, as close as the railway could get. And these massive things, I was rather pleased to find the diagram on the top left to show that I actually had to dig gun pits to cope with the recoil of the guns. Now, once these moved into place, they knew exactly where Douaumont was. They'd built it. They got good maps. The very first shell hit the roof of Douaumont, and the second shell penetrated the roof of Douaumont. And so these massive guns, 40mm caliber shells, are penetrating Douaumont. Douaumont is just going to get blown to pieces. And so the Germans then evacuate. They move out of Douaumont. There's some fighting over there, but the Germans move out and the French retake the fort of Douaumont. I was talking earlier with Gary, I think it was, about visiting and the towns that have been destroyed at Verdun. This is Fleury, or Fleury in front of Douaumont, retaken on the 18th of August, 10 days of hard fighting. The Moroccan infantry go in singing the Marseillaise, and they finally hold it. So the French are gradually taking bits of Verdun back. Big offensives in December, and in the final offensive, the French are taking over 11,000 prisoners and 115 guns. That's astonishing. That was really impressive. The Germans have worn themselves out. If they'd just kept it to an artillery battle, just kept shooting in, then maybe they'd have done better, but they kept sending the infantry in as well. I love this, that some German officers complained to Mangin that they don't have much comfort in the prisoner of war camps. And he says, "We do regret it, gentlemen, but then we did not expect so many of you." As ever, various people get sacked for performing badly. Those are the big numbers. So the numbers so the French on the left, there's possibly 1.1 million French soldiers involved in 75 to 85 divisions. The Germans, 1.25 million soldiers, but only 50 divisions. So that's the French rotating in and out. Casualties, French anywhere from 300,000 to 500,000. The Germans maybe fewer, maybe closer to 300,000, 400,000. Who knows?